This week, we'll discover how the powerful, even unsettling imagery in this week's gospel reveals God's fierce love and protection for the vulnerable. We'll explore what it means to reclaim our identity through love, service, and humility. Join us as we dive deep into Jesus' challenge to live in peace, lift up those in need, and be the hands and feet of Christ in the world. The thing that really sticks out in the gospel reading is the vivid, pretty frightening imagery. I think that's pretty much everyone's first stop when reading it. We can't help our minds hanging up on it for at least a little while. I know that as a kid, it was pretty distressing to me. Millstones are the first. Just watch a YouTube clip of a large ship anchor being dropped and going out of control, and the speed and violence that ensues draws a pretty vivid picture in your head of being pulled into the briny deep. Then there's the idea of self-mutilation with the hand, foot, eye thing. What do we do with all that? Where do we see the good news in this reading? Well, Nadia Bolz-Weber made an observation in a sermon. She said, "It's only once in a while that we get to hear Jesus talk about brutal self-mutilation as a sign of discipleship." She said, "I remember the summer I was 11 years old when I stole candy from a Kmart and then hid it in the heat duct in my room. And I remember hearing this passage soon after that and thinking how my hand had indeed caused me to sin. And then and there I decided to never steal again, lest Jesus insist I hack off my own limbs. The problem, of course, is that my hand has never caused a darn thing. My eye doesn't cause me to sin. My foot can't be held accountable for my missteps. If you want to find the culprit behind my sin, don't look at my hand, look at my heart. My poor feet just do what they're told." Well, I agree. The breakdown is coming from the heart. What Jesus is doing indicates the level of his deep concern for those who are vulnerable. The warning about causing a little one to stumble, we get a reminder that God protects and treasures those who might be marginalized or misunderstood by the world. Jesus' love extends especially to those who need extra care. There's a great deal of good news there. For those who find themselves in that group, we are reminded that God watches over you with special love. He sees your challenges and understands your struggles. You are precious to him, and he calls on all of us to treat one another with care and kindness, protecting and lifting one another up. We are told in 1 John that God is love. Jesus tells us that he is the way, the truth, and the life. Isaiah tells us, "The mountains may shift and the hills may be shaken, but my faithful love won't shift from you," says God, "and my covenant of peace won't be shaken." And 1 John also says, "So we have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in them." Love is the key attribute of God, because God is love. If we are abiding in God, then it has to be our key attribute too, our default, our go-to. It's like the camp song says, "They will know we are Christians by our love." Well, this should be the case, but we can see how we, like the disciples, can get caught up in our own selfish or self-centered ambitions and desires and stray from our core identity of love. Jesus talks about salt losing its saltiness. This has also been sort of a stopping place for me. It's a very interesting concept. And so I did some salt study. As it turns out, salt is not easily destroyed. I think Jesus was talking about what we would call table salt, which is made of two elements, sodium and chlorine. Separately, each of these elements are pretty dangerous stuff, but when they're bonded in the right way to one another, they're salt. And for salt, pretty much the only way to break them down is a chemical reaction to free those two elements. If salt is broken down, or maybe we could say loses its saltiness, it's not salt anymore. Salt that has lost its saltiness is missing that essential characteristic that makes it distinct or makes it salt at all. A follower of Jesus that does not live in love and become a humble servant is missing the essential characteristics that set Jesus' followers apart. What were we created to be? What makes us not what we were created to be? Well, we were created to be in relationship with God. And Jesus points out that being in a relationship with God means being in a relationship with all of God's children, acting in love and lifting others up and walking, breathing, and living in that essential characteristic of love. If we look at the gospel lesson, and even back to the first lesson, the problem is what's cooking needs more salt. The disciples are complaining to Jesus about the guy that's healing people, making people's lives better, releasing people from their darkness in Jesus' name, but who is not following them, forgetting about the people in need and what a wonderful turn their circumstances have taken. They have turned inward, and they are self-righteously bringing their complaint to Jesus. They receive a rather dramatic response. No, 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 no. You are missing the point. If the saltiness is gone, if there's not love, you are no longer salt. You're something else. The response reminded me of that big moment in the Monty Python parrot sketch. A man returns to the pet shop when he has been deceived and sold a dead parrot. The clerk tries to argue and said that the parrot was just sad or pining. The response: he's not pining. He's passed on. The parrot is no more. He has ceased to be. He's expired and gone to meet his maker. He's stiff, bereft of life. He rests in peace. If you hadn't nailed him to the perch, he'd be pushing up the daisies. His metabolic processes are now history. He's off the twig. He's kicked the bucket. He's shuffled off his mortal coil, run down the curtain, and joined the choir invisible. This is an ex-parrot. No longer a parrot. No longer salty. Jesus makes his point just as dramatically. If you find you are being caught up in that allure of power like the disciples, if you find yourself substituting your will or personal interest over being a follower of Jesus and sharing the love of God, which is the essential characteristic that defines us as followers, then you are not a follower, an ex-follower. So Jesus urges us to take action. Whether it's toxic relationships, bad habits, or negative influences, it's important to distance ourselves from things that lead us away from life, light, and love. If something in your life is holding you back or pulling you down, don't be afraid to let it go. You deserve to walk in peace and purpose, free from anything that keeps you from becoming your best self. Jesus encourages his followers to be at peace with one another, which is a powerful message for creating a loving, inclusive community. It is a reminder that each member is essential to creating a peaceful, loving environment where everyone is valued. The disciples were at a dangerous crossroads where the suffering were seeming a lot like props to bolster their reputation over the reality of them being fellow human beings deserving of our love and compassion. Each of us is important in creating a peaceful, loving community. By caring for one another, helping each other when needed, and showing kindness, we can build a place where everyone feels loved, accepted, and part of God's family. Jesus is welcoming of the guy the disciples are complaining about. Jesus teaches that no one should be excluded from doing good just because they aren't part of a specific group. This emphasizes that everyone is important in God's eyes and that each and every person has something valuable to contribute. No one is outside of God's love or purpose. You are loved and valued by God just as you are. Whether you walk, speak, or think differently. God welcomes you. There's a place for you, and what you do matters in God's eyes. The ideas of the millstone and mutilation are dramatic, but are used to show God's fierce protection over his children, each and every one. In this passage, we are reminded of the weight of our actions and the importance of love. We are called to reflect on our lives and remove anything, whether it's pride, bitterness, fear, or selfishness, that pulls us away from loving God and loving others. Just like salt that's lost its flavor, we too can lose sight of our purpose when we fail to live out love in our relationships and communities. When we turn inward, like the disciples did, focusing on who's in or out, we miss the point entirely. But God, in God's great mercy, invites us back, invites us to reclaim our saltiness by choosing love, humility, and service over self-interest. So how do we live into that challenge? We examine our hearts. What are the millstones in our lives? What weighs us down or causes us to stumble? Is it a habit, pride, or a mindset? Jesus invites us to let go of those things, no matter how difficult, so that we can walk freely in his love and peace. We protect the vulnerable, especially those who are marginalized, misunderstood, or overlooked, and we live out our identity as salt and light. We are called to live in love, serve others, and create a peaceful, inclusive community where all are valued. Where can we bring light and hope to a place of darkness or despair this week? God's love for you is steadfast and unshakable. No matter what you face or how far you may have strayed, God's love never changes. Because of that love, we are empowered to love others. Let's be committed to love more deeply, to walk in peace with one another, and to be the hands and feet of Jesus in a world that desperately needs both. Amen.